Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and I really like metal models. I also really like completing projects. I'm all the hyped about KONFLIKT'47 in addition to that, so let's enjoy all three today. These are the Warlord Games Battle Frame Officer for the Imperial Japanese Army. They are wearing powered armoured suits with a very stylish shogunate style. I'm sure you could argue them as samurai of sci-fi. They come with the left arms on one sprue and the right arms on another, which might cause problems with other kit, but they're actually not in strict pairs in this case, and so that's fine. The right arms have the ranged weapons, 2 submachine guns and a compression rifle, and I'll give the rifle to the officer himself. The left arms have some kind of electro-punching ram thing, and one of those also has a katana blade sticking out the front, and I'll give the nice one to my officer there, the coolest kit for the biggest boss. After that, there's just the sprue of banners, one slightly larger, 2 smaller ones. Guess which model's getting which. I went over the models and cleaned up the mould lines, which actually wasn't a big deal. The metal is pretty soft, and the mould lines weren't particularly prominent, as Warlord Games is actually rather good at casting metal models. I also washed all of the pieces with normal washing up liquid, fully rinsed them and thoroughly dried them before using super glue to join the pieces. The joints are all pretty large, allowing for a lot of contact area, so I didn't feel that pinning would be important. The flags plug into a block on the back of the models, and the arm joints are flat. Now I would prefer a ball joint for the arm, both because they become more poseable, and because a curved connection surface provides a far stronger final join than a flat one does. That's just good old engineering, that is. After gluing the pudding base to a raised 25mm base, I smushed some Milliput over the whole thing to make a little mound of dirt for each of the models to be standing on. I primed them and I used my airbrush to base coat them in a bright, saturated blue. You see, I've got another Japanese KONFLIKT'47 model that you'll see on the channel soon, and that thing is going to look utterly fantastic in a bright blue. And I really like making my armoured officers match the vehicles, and it also fits that kind of future samurai aesthetic, so it's all coming together nicely. I went around the models to make sure I got all of the base coats down, and all I really want to talk about is the armour panels on the models, both very stylish and in their general layout. There is in fact quite a few layers of different parts to these models, but I didn't want to get caught up in separating every single thing into a completely different colour. And so the big shoulder and thigh armour panels and the smaller armour pieces underneath on the chest and belt all got a medium brown colour. It looks a little darker on the video as the blue underneath is influencing it. There is one big step that I've done pretty much to all of these sci-fi armoured suits and some sci-fi vehicles as well, and that's to fill in the panel lining as early as possible. Usually panel lining is a final step, and it's done exceptionally carefully and neatly at the end to create a precision effect. But by doing it early, the effect is much more subtle, and I can be way messier and therefore quicker, as later steps will naturally cover the mistakes that I make here. But we'll have to wait and see about that effect later on, because first I'm darkening everything on these models with a wash. Largely black, but softened slightly with a little brown. This is going to double up the darkness in those recesses and also darken the entire rest of the model as well. And I'm really not being careful with this wash compared to how I usually apply washes, and that's because I want to be really heavy with the highlighting, and so having a much darker starting point is going to help me out. Moving on to the highlighting when the wash was dry, I'll start with the brown, and that's quite deliberate, as the blue is much more important. The brown is going to be kind of the complementary colour, so I want to get at least one layer of highlighting on the brown before I do the blue. And this is very much the same original paint going on over the same paint under the wash as over the wash. And it suspiciously looks terribly a lot like an edge highlight, which is true, but there's also some in-edge highlighting going on as well. Whilst there will be another layer of highlighting here, I have a solid understanding of generally what it will look like, so I can work on the blue now. And the blue was somewhat disjointed in a way. In some places I put the highlights on edges and some were in edges and some centered on panels, and I didn't really think I had any kind of real artistic plan. I just went with whatever I felt was right on each individual piece. Once I was done with each model, I looked over it and I made sure that any dark area got at least a little bit of blue highlighting, as I wanted it to be fairly consistent over the whole model, and because it's just a good way to not miss bits. What I did avoid, however, was the under armour. Just like with the armour panels coming in different types, the battle frame and the clothing underneath were still further types. To differentiate these without adding in multiple different colours, I highlighted pretty much every metal piece, bar, frame, component, strap and belt with the blue, but I left all of the Under Armour clothing unhighlighted, leaving it very, very dark and only subtly blue. All told, at this stage, it's pretty much only painted with two paints, that brown and the blue, as each is being used as the shadow with the wash, and then the highlight in every layer of highlight above it. I mean, fine, yes, there's technically the wash and the black panel line and the red and the silver on other parts of the model, but I'm talking about the main components of the models. It is pretty much just two paints and the effects I'm applying to them. Moving on to my final step and going back to those armor panels, I can really emphasize the style that I wanted to achieve here. As those armor panels are already highlighted to a medium brown, I can just tap on just a tiny bit of a really bright sandy tan to make for a really strong contrasty highlight. This also complements the blue, which has such a contrast between its darkest and highest points. This sand highlight was only applied where the edge highlight had already gone, but only applied as smaller dots within that shape. And once completed, the models are now finished, I have one of the strongest contrasting shadow to highlight paint jobs that I've ever done. So finally, after well over a year on the grey shelf, the Imperial Japanese Army battle frame officer can join my other armoured officers, and this little set, this little project is complete. Just in time for more to be released with Konflikt 47 2nd edition. Send me some comments about the paint job below, especially if you like painting metal models as well, because they're awesome. I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.